Welcome to It's a Snap. Save time, save money, eat healthy podcast. We help people discover small changes in food and activity choices that make a big difference in their overall health across a lifetime. And here's your host, Senior Snap Ed Nutritionist Wanda Collins.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. My guest today is Olivia Johnson, Snap Ed Nutritionist and Registered Dietitian from Erie County. Today's topic, Go Lean with Protein. Welcome, Olivia.
Thank you for having me on the show, Wanda. I'm so excited to chat about a food group that's having a big moment right now, protein.
Yeah. Would you share with our listeners what some of the different types of protein foods are?
Sure. Protein foods fall into two different categories, the protein that we get from animals and then protein that we get from plants. So some examples of animal proteins would be foods like meat, such as our chicken, beef, pork, seafoods like tuna, salmon, and shellfish, and eggs. And then some examples of our plant proteins would be foods like lentils, beans, nuts and seeds, nut butters, and tofu.
That is a lot of food choices, and I personally tend to lean toward the plant proteins, but that's just because I like them better. But I will eat a few of the animal proteins. Well, so share with our listeners what some of the benefits are of eating a variety of protein.
Yeah, so there's benefits to eating all different types of protein foods. And we really want to aim to get a variety of protein foods in our diet so that we can enjoy the benefits that each type of protein provides for our body. So, for example, those animal proteins are rich in a very important nutrient for the health of our blood called iron. Our body loves iron that comes from animal proteins more than it really loves the iron we get from plant proteins. So while the plant proteins do have iron in them, the animal proteins provide more iron with each bite. Another important nutrient that only our animal proteins give us is vitamin B12, which plays an important role in metabolism, which is a word to describe the way that our body breaks down food to then give us energy.
There's a lot of information there, so I can look forward to iron in my animal protein. There is some iron in plant protein, but you mentioned vitamin B12. I have to be careful of and make sure I take it if I'm focusing on those plant proteins, right?
Yep, exactly. We don't really get We don't really get B12 from our plant proteins.
So then let's talk about those different types of proteins. What are some of the benefits of the plant proteins over the animal proteins?
So plant proteins, while they don't really give us iron or B12, they are very high in an awesome nutrient called fiber. And fiber acts like the sperm in our bodies, collecting all the waste that the body does not need, and then it helps to carry it all the way through and out of our digestive tract. Research also shows that higher fiber intake is associated with a reduced risk for mortality, cardiovascular, or heart disease, and some cancers.
Wow. That is really important, and I think it's important for our listeners to know that they really should try to keep track of how much how much fiber they're eating. And do you know how much fiber a person should have in a day, or does it vary?
I believe it varies by age.
Okay.
But I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head.
Okay. I was just wondering because, I eat a lot of plant foods. So I was like, I wonder how much fiber I'm getting. And so I just want to think about the fiber itself. It also, I know, helps regulate blood sugar and it helps reduce blood cholesterol. Is that correct?
Yes, it definitely helps with that. And our plant proteins contain higher amounts of fat that are really good for our bodies and the health of our hearts. And these are called unsaturated fat.
The unsaturated fat or the heart-healthy fat. That is very important to our diets. And it's or in words that I could say, an inexpensive way to get protein. So what suggestions do you have for finding other sources of unsaturated fats?
Some animal proteins, specifically fish like salmon, tuna, herring, and mackerel, do have these heart-healthy unsaturated fats. So it's important to incorporate these kinds of seafood into the diet as much as we're able to. However, most other animal proteins, especially those cuts with visible fat, contain saturated fat, which have been associated with an increased risk for heart disease when they're consumed in excess.
Okay, so one thing I was just wondering about, if we can back up just a little bit. We talked about unsaturated fats and how to incorporate that into our diets. So my question to you is, what are some ways you would incorporate some of these fish items into your diet? How do you do that?
That's a great question. I really love making tuna salad to eat throughout the week as on its own with some crackers or even inside of a wrap. And I'm also a very big fan of baking my fish.
Oh, really? You bake fish. That's how you prepare it. Yeah, I'm not I like fish a little bit, but I'm not a huge fish eater. And I only just realized how much I like fish. Isn't that funny? I know everybody says, it takes time. You have to try things multiple times before you like them. But here I am in my old age, and I tried fish one day and realized I actually like salmon. So I should eat more salmon. I think that's just really funny. Our tastes do change. So if people are like, I don't like fish, I would really recommend, give it a try here and there, and the different ways it's made can change its flavor. So I do like baked and I like broiled fish. I'm finding I like both of those ways.
Yeah, broiled sounds really good. And I love that you bring up that point about always trying new things no matter what age you are, because it is so true that our taste buds change and the things that we like, it really does change with time. So always important to give things a go.
Yeah, it is. And especially the healthier foods. I'm a big advocate of, if you've had it one way and somebody makes it a separate way or a different way, then try it, because you might find out you really like it the way they made it. Because like you were talking about green beans earlier when we were talking, you were talking about making Creole green beans. And I know people who won't eat green beans, but I bet they would like a recipe like that. And because it's different. It's not the same, just either cook up some frozen ones, cut up some fresh ones, or throw a can of green beans on things. You're adding a bunch of spices. And the same can be said for these fishes. The stuff you put on them can really make a difference. And I would like to just recommend that if people are looking for recipes, they can go to our website, snapedny.org, and find a huge number of recipes. And I know there are several fish recipes on there I'm dying to try. So just someplace people can go to get some extra recipes. So now I brought us back to unsaturated fat. So now let's talk about the saturated fat. So how can our listeners limit the amount of saturated fat from animal proteins?
So one thing our listeners can do is incorporate more plant proteins into the diet. So this doesn't mean that you have to completely eliminate animal proteins to have a healthy heart and to reduce the amount of saturated fat in the diet, but it really just means including more plant proteins in the diet. So if you're preparing a recipe with ground turkey or beef, you could substitute half of that meat with beans, such as a black bean, kidney bean, or my favorite, white cannellini beans, which are going to be higher in fiber and unsaturated fat. And just like you mentioned earlier about looking for recipes for fish, if people want to look for recipes that use more plant proteins, then you can also go to the website snapedny.org to find tons of ideas of different ways to incorporate plant proteins like beans and lentils into your meals.
Wow, that's interesting. Your favorite is a white cannellini bean?
Yes, I love those. They're so just nice, soft, and full of fiber.
Yeah, they are. They're kind of a creamy bean. I like using those in soup. I don't know why.
Me too.
But soup is good. I do like black beans if I'm making a Mexican style dish. Because I found out black beans kind of absorb flavors more. So if I put them in a little bit of salsa or something, those black beans actually kind of absorb some of that flavor. So you're not just getting black bean, you're getting flavor when you eat it. But wow. So cannellini beans, who knew? Oh my gosh. All of that sounds like a simple solution for decreasing saturated fat, and I really hope our listeners give those plant proteins a try. And they are things like these beans, not green beans, but the beans that we just talked about, the ones that can be dried and rehydrated, which is really simple to do. I highly recommend learning how to do that because it's way cheaper to buy them dried and then rehydrate them. So eating those beans, and also nuts and seeds fall into the plant protein group. And those can also be very tasty. I just taught to a bunch of kids, we were talking about pumpkin seeds. And I said to them, if you take the shell off a pumpkin seed, you get this little seed on the inside. And of course, they did it with the pumpkin seeds. And I said, the fancy name for those little things? And they all looked at me and they went, pumpkin seeds inside pumpkin seeds? And I said, no, there is a fancy name for the little pumpkin seed. And honestly, right now, I have totally forgotten what that name is. But it is. There's a fancy name for it. So if you see it, you can throw it on your salads, and it's real tasty. If I remember it, I'm going to say it at some point in this podcast. So
is it pepitas?
Oh, that's it. Yes. Yes.
Oh, I got it.
You got it. Thank you, Olivia. Yes, pepitas. They are so delicious, and you can sprinkle them on a salad. You can sprinkle them on anything, and they are so delicious, and they're a plant protein. They're good for you. Mm-hmm. Who knew? Totally. You could have something delicious that's good for you. Anyway, thank you for that, Olivia. Oh my gosh, talk about having a brain cramp. Anyway, all of this really does sound like a simple solution. Just do a little bit of subbing out, and you don't have to do the whole animal protein. You can do half and half, but it would decrease the saturated fat. And I just would like to take this opportunity to remind our listeners that this is the It's a Snap, Save Time, Save Money, Eat Healthy podcast. And if you would like to make small changes that can make a big difference, find recipes, find a New York State SNAP-Ed office near you, visit our website, snapedny.org. That's snapedny.org. You can also find us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. And subscribe to our podcast so that you can catch the latest in SNAP-Ed news. So a brief recap. Today, we are talking about protein, and we have talked about varying our protein routine by choosing animal and plant-based proteins. Plant-based proteins have fiber and unsaturated fat. So does seafoods. They have the unsaturated fat. And the importance of lowering saturated fat by incorporating some of those plant proteins into our food. So what other tips do you have us to lower saturated fat?
Another tip to lower saturated fat from our protein foods is to use low-fat cooking methods when preparing those protein foods. So this could be like roasting, grilling, or broiling foods instead of frying the food. Also, if the food has some visible fat, then you can trim that off prior to cooking. And yeah, you might lose a little flavor, but you can always make up for this by using a combination of seasonings.
Ooh, I love to combine seasonings. I do. I think all the different flavors. And my husband sometimes thinks I'm crazy because he goes, you really like flavor, don't you? And I'm like, yeah, who doesn't? But apparently exactly. I like it. Apparently I like it more than others. But yeah, back to the cooking styles. That's absolutely wonderful. Roasting, grilling, or broiling. And you can do the same thing with those plant proteins. You can do them the same way. So now you mentioned two things that I would like to follow up on. First was the seasoning to improve flavor. What are your go-to seasonings?
That's a really great question. And it would have to depend on what I'm cooking, but the spices that I tend to use most often in my pantry would be the Italian seasoning, cumin, and Cajun seasonings.
Ooh.
And I also love red pepper flakes to add some heat to my protein foods. And when it comes to baking salmon specifically, I really love using everything bagel seasoning.
Oh my gosh, really? So I have to say then, you like spicy food. You love those red pepper flakes and you love spicy food. Is that right?
Definitely. Even the Cajun seasoning and something like paprika adds a lot of good kick too.
Yeah, and I just have to say, I like flavor. I'm not big on a lot of heat. So, and that's okay. And that's what I think our listeners need to know is that you don't have to use the seasonings we like. You use the seasonings that appeal to you, and you'll find that you really like certain foods when you add certain seasonings. I don't think I've ever had everything bagel seasoning on salmon. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, it's very good. I had it out at a restaurant one time and it changed the way I eat salmon always. So I love making it just in the oven or in my air fryer and you just pat on the seasoning like it's a crust almost.
No way.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, that sounds delicious. Yeah, it really does. And I know salmon steaks themselves can be expensive, but it seems like if someone wanted to buy a can of salmon, so they're going to get the healthy protein, but they're also going to get calcium out of it, they could make a salmon patty and use this everything bagel seasoning on it. And it seems like that would be a healthy, flavorful choice. So that's really cool. I never would have put the two together. So I'm glad.
Yeah, and I love the idea of salmon patties. That sounds super good.
Yeah. I know my mom used to make those often, and the way she made them was good, but I'll tell you, she never used everything bagel seasoning, but that doesn't mean I can't. So I may have to give that a try. So all of that sounds super yummy. And I do have a second thing that I want to follow up with. You mentioned the words lean protein, and I just have to say I was working with a workshop of youth, like they were 4th, 5th grade, and I said lean protein, and they all looked at me funny, and then I asked them if they knew what lean protein meant, and they all leaned to one side, and I thought that was really funny. I was like, okay, I need to change language and define things. So I told them that wasn't what I meant, but I was wondering if you would explain to our listeners what you mean by lean protein.
Yes, definitely. So our lean proteins would be foods like turkey, chicken, and beans. And we just call it lean proteins because it means that they generally have less fat than other types of protein foods. And when it comes to our poultry specifically, a really simple way to reduce fat is to remove that skin after cooking.
Oh, there you go. If you leave the skin on while you cook it, it keeps it moist, but then you pull it off so you don't end up eating all that fat. What a good idea.
Exactly.
That is a great idea. So, it's not leaning on the side of their plate, which is, I guess, what they thought I meant by that. So, cooking with protein foods can lead to illness, though. We do have to talk about being safe. So if we're not handling the protein correctly, I think we can end up being pretty sick. So I was wondering if we could discuss some food safety rules.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm very glad you asked this because I was really hoping that we would be able to talk about some food safety today because it's really important when it comes to our protein foods because many of our protein foods, specifically the animal-based ones, are very rich in moisture as well as protein. And so it provides a really ideal environment for many of the bacteria that live on our foods that can end up making us sick. So it's really important when we store, prepare, and serve protein foods to stick to the 4 main messages of food safety.
Perfect. That's exactly what I was thinking about. So let's start with the first one, which is keep things clean. What does that mean, Olivia?
So this means starting off by washing your hands under warm running water with soap for 20 seconds and having a clean surface when preparing our protein foods.
Oh, okay. So it's amazing how keeping things clean can go a long way from keeping us healthy. I mean, not just with protein foods, but washing your hands and stuff helps prevent you from getting some diseases outside of protein foods. So we should always keep our area clean. And our next food safety rule is separate, don't cross-contaminate.
Yep. And this means separating raw meat, poultry, and fish from other cooked or ready-to-eat foods. So if raw animal proteins touch other foods while shopping, storing, and preparing foods, there is a risk for cross-contamination in which the harmful bacteria from our protein foods can then spread to the other foods nearby.
I'll just say yuck. Go ahead.
Yes, I completely agree. Big yuck. And the big way to prevent this cross-contamination is to consider storing your meats on the lowest shelf in the fridge, so that way it can't leak onto foods that would be stored below it. And also take advantage of those produce bags when you shop at the store. You put your meats inside of there so it all stays nice and separate. And when we prepare our foods, make sure to use a separate cutting board and knife. And if you only have one cutting board and knife, then just make sure you thoroughly clean them with soap and warm water before you prepare your other foods like fruits or vegetables.
Oh, that's a great idea. There is nothing worse I can't imagine something worse than cutting up meat on a cutting board and then grabbing my carrots and cutting them up. That would be bad. So I love that, washing things off. Now, I don't know about you, but I had to say yuck at some point. But animal protein, touching my veggies, when they are not cooked together, makes me a little queasy because there is a lot of bacteria in there. So we have to keep things clean and we have to separate them appropriately. What about cooking to the right temperature?
So cooking to the right temperature is super important because that heat will destroy any of the harmful bacteria on the food. And different sources of animal proteins will have different proper internal temperatures. So make sure to familiarize yourself with the proper temperatures before cooking. And you can find the list of temperatures by Googling USDA Food Safe Temp listings. Then you just want to make sure to use a thermometer to get the most accurate reading of the internal temperature of the food.
Yeah, it is really important to get food to those temperatures. And I know you can get a pretty inexpensive but accurate thermometer from some of the bigger box stores. I do want to say just something really quickly that just occurred to me. When you get one of those thermometers, it's really important to test them and see how close they are to the right temperature. So if you put them in boiling water, very carefully put them in boiling water, maybe hold them with some tongs or something so your hand's not right over it. It should read 212 degrees Fahrenheit. If you put it in ice water, so that's ice cubes with a little water in it, if you put it in there, it should read 32 degrees Fahrenheit. And so you should check your thermometer just in case they're a little off. Some of them can be adjusted and sometimes you just have to remember to do the math. But that just occurred to me. Always check those thermometers. Make sure they're measuring appropriately. Let's see, we have to make sure we follow the recipe's directions carefully because they will tell you how long to cook, but depending on your oven, you may have to cook it a little longer or you might cook it a little bit shorter. So make sure you're doing that. And on to our last food safety rule. What do we have so far? What have we covered? We have covered keeping things clean. We've covered, what's the next one? Totally blanking.
Separating our foods.
Separating our foods and cooking our foods. So what about chilling our foods?
So after we cook our protein foods, we want to make sure that we then chill it either in the refrigerator or the freezer within 2 hours of preparing that food. And I also want to mention too, with chilling, you might even be storing your food in the freezer. And when you thaw it, it's really important that you never, ever, ever thaw that food out on the counter.
Never, ever, ever?
Never, ever, ever, ever. Try to store it overnight in the refrigerator. That's one of the best methods, even though it does require a little bit of planning ahead. And if you forget to plan ahead or just simply don't have time to do that, you can always thaw it by putting it in a bowl under the sink and let it run with hot water. Let the sink run the whole time for about 30 minutes.
Well, that's good to know. I love that idea about thawing in the refrigerator. And when you said not put it on the counter, I just want to add not put it in the sink unless you're going to run that water over it because the sink is the same as the counter. It's room temperature, and we all know that's when bacteria loves to grow. So we talked about plant-based proteins, and those protein foods have to be handled correctly as well. I just want to make sure our listeners know just because it's a bean doesn't mean that you can handle it willy-nilly. You definitely have to handle those correctly, get them refrigerated within 2 hours. And holiday time, we like to leave the turkeys out and the bean stuff out. And we really should get those contained. People can always go to the refrigerator and get extra if they want more. But I will tell you that a friend of mine had rehydrated some beans and she had left them on the counter before she went to work. And when she came home from work, which was about 8 hours later, her husband had come home before her and he had eaten some and he got very sick because it is a protein food and you have to be careful with it. So please make sure you chill within 2 hours.
Yes, very good point. And I really couldn't agree more that regardless of the kind of protein that we're going to cook with, we want to make sure that we practice our food safety.
Yeah, I hope people are listening because that's one way to avoid a hospital visit. So I want to thank you for those food safety refresheners. And this is important to keep in mind. So thank you again for coming today. Is there anything else you would like to share? But there's something I definitely want to ask you. So anything else that we've talked about that you want to share? And then I have a question for you.
I did have one more thought about the food safety, which is just that it's kind of like a common misconception. Most people think it's more likely to get a foodborne illness or sick from eating food when we dine out, but really it's way more common to get sick from dining inside the home. So again, just to reiterate how important it is, especially this time of year with lots of group gatherings, to practice that food safety.
Very good. That is really true, especially when you're having, even in the middle of summer, if you're doing a barbecue. One of the things I saw that I thought was really smart with a barbecue is if you take like a sled you might use in the winter time and you put ice in it, and then you put some of those foods that have to be kept cold, like potato salad, sometimes barbecue beans, people want them colder rather than hotter, putting them down inside the ice so that when you're at a barbecue, you're not going to poison people with your potato salad. I thought that was a really good way to keep things cold in the middle of summer. So
yeah, that's a really smart idea. And I mean, how awesome if you already have that sled, just get a little more bang for your buck out of it.
Yeah, exactly. Because, well, I don't know. I have seen people slide down sandy dunes on a sled, but I don't have those. I live in the frozen north. We use our sled in the winter.
Yeah, we definitely don't have that in Buffalo either.
Yeah. So here's my question. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
What is your favorite protein food?
Ooh, this is a good one. I'm going to have to go with eggs. Even though they're getting a little more expensive right now, I really love them at any time of the day. And I always enjoy them with some cheese and frozen vegetables mixed in.
Oh, really? So like you cook your eggs up and you throw in frozen veggies and cheese, like an omelet kind of thing?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh.
I took a lot of inspiration actually from making the skillet veggie eggs from the foodhero.org website. And I also love making the Snap Ed veggie scramble wraps, which have peppers and onions in the eggs.
Oh, wow. That sounds really good. Sounds really good. Well, that one you just said, the veggie scramble wrap, is that something you could make for a quick breakfast? Like, could you make it the day before, put it in the refrigerator, and if you're in a hurry, grab it and just microwave it to heat it up and eat it as you go? It sounds like something you could wrap up and eat as you go.
Yeah, definitely. You could totally make it the night before. And again, just make sure that you're following that chill rule and putting the food in the fridge or the freezer within 2 hours. And you could totally heat it back up in the oven, under the broiler, in the microwave. Or if you have access to one of those toaster ovens, those work really great too for heating up, especially frozen veggie wraps.
Okay. Well, that's really good to know. So eggs, yes, they are versatile, aren't they? You can do so many things with eggs. So I want to thank you again, Olivia, for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I had a really great time chatting about protein foods with you.
Yeah, protein foods, they are an important part of our diet, and it's important to handle them appropriately. So, listeners, remember to subscribe to our podcast, It's a Snap, and visit our website, snapedny.org, and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube.
Thank you for joining us today. We know the healthy choice isn't always the easiest choice, but small changes can make a big difference. Start today by getting involved with Snap Ed New York. The program is free for those who qualify or receive SNAP benefits. We want to help you save time, save money, and eat healthy. Learn how SNAP Ed can make a difference in your life. For more information and to find your local program, visit snapedny.org. This material was funded by USDA's Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP. This institution is an equal opportunity provider.